I hope you've enjoyed the food and fellowship so far. Of course, the purpose of this event is to highlight a very important issue in the governor's race, and that's an issue that's near and dear to all of our hearts at CPC. It's the issue of preserving women's sports and standing against, for lack of a better term, the transgender craze. In a larger sense, this is about standing for truth and for common sense. As many of you know, Commonwealth Policy Center worked to pass Senate Bill 150 this last legislative session. I've had the privilege to work with some legislators who are here before that bill was ever introduced. Of course, many of you know that that bill put an end to gender identity indoctrination in public schools. It stopped forcing the gender-preferred pronouns from teachers in public schools. It stopped the boys going into girls' bathrooms in the schools, prohibited hormone therapy and sex change surgery for minors. And by the way, as I say that, in one sense, I'm a little bit ashamed that I have to say that. Proud that our legislators stood for the right thing, but it's sad in one respect that we live in a culture where that's an issue that we need to deal with. That was an important bill nonetheless, and it was a bill that current Governor Andy Beshear vetoed. Now, it's interesting that he's spending a lot of time denying that he's for the gender transitioning of minors. He says it doesn't happen here in Kentucky, but we know that that's not true. As you'll see in a resource that we have on the table, actually on all of your tables, you'll see a letter reprinted from University of Kentucky Transform Clinic that in fact says that it has been happening prior to the passage of Senate Bill 150. Commonwealth Policy Center was also instrumental in passing Senate Bill 83, the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which kept boys off of girls' sports teams here in the Commonwealth. And it was sponsored by my good friend, State Senator Robbie Mills, and now Lieutenant Governor running mate for Daniel Cameron. And I learned just a couple hours ago that Robbie was able to make it here. Where are you, Robbie? I don't see you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, that was a bill that Governor Beshear vetoed as well. And of course, he said, well, it doesn't happen. You don't have boys that are joining the girls' sports team. Well, you're going to hear in a minute from a young female athlete who that did affect right here in Kentucky. And I thought, who better to speak to this issue than Riley Gaines, the nation's leading advocate to preserve not just women's sports, but women's dignity and women's private spaces. Riley is a 12-time All-American swimming champion at the University of Kentucky. She holds 5 SEC titles and was the 2022 Southeast Conference Women's Swimming and Diving Scholar Athlete of the Year. She also tied for 5th place at the Nationals with Leah Thomas. Some of you might recall that name. He's the biological male who walked away with that trophy. Riley went away from that meet empty-handed. And Riley was interviewed shortly after that event and wondered, who is standing with women? And I'm here to tell you tonight, Riley, where is Riley? I need to know where she is before I get going too much further. Riley? And I'm having a hard time. There you are. Riley, I am here to tell you that CPC is standing with you and that this audience is standing with you and that we appreciate your dedication and courage. Let's give Riley Gaines a heartfelt round of applause.
Here we go. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, it's nice to be in a room where you get an applause because I have been in way too many rooms where that is not an exception. A few months back, I went to San Francisco, which was my first mistake. But I went there, I guess naive, because I thought the people would come with an open mind, willing to listen to something very similar to what I'm going to talk to you guys about. You know, what it takes to be an athlete, the unfair competition, the locker room, all of those different things. But they did not come with open minds. I was met with ambush. I was attacked. I was punched by men who were wearing dresses, which, here, does this Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to stand somewhere. But anyways, which fortunately for me, their punches don't hurt that bad. But seriously, these protesters, they ended up holding me for ransom. Me and the police. They held us for ransom for over 4 hours, where they demanded that if we wanted to make it home to see our families safely again, we had to pay them money. The dean of students was there negotiating with them on how much I guess I was worth, to which they agreed $10 each. And I was kind of offended because I think I'm worth more than $10. Granted, there was a lot of protesters. But anyways, all of that to say, I truly appreciate you guys and a warm Kentucky welcome. Someone came up to me before this and she was like, I didn't know the attire was a Kentucky shirt and blue jeans. That is always the attire. Anywhere you go, church on Sunday morning, this is always the attire. A little bit about me. I grew up just over the state line, near the Portland area, Gallatin, so I feel like a Kentuckian. Graduated last year from University of Kentucky. Come on, tell me in this room we say go Cats. No go-karts here, huh? Hopefully we can all agree we're not going to start singing Rocky Top, because that's the worst. Graduated from University of Kentucky last year. Got my degree in human health sciences and health law. Had every intention upon graduating to go to dental school. I had already accepted my seat, put my deposit down, scored in the top percentile of the DAT, which is the dental admissions test, which is this really miserable 4.5-ish hour long test to get into dental school. Chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, weirdly enough. Ultimately, I really realized the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make plans for yourself, because he very clearly had different plans for me. After seeing what I saw, really facing what we faced, how could I continue on with dental school? You know, I have a young sister. I just got married to my wonderful husband who's over here, and you know, one day we hope to have a daughter of our own. How could I be in the position that I was in and not fight for them? Of course, the women who came before me who fought relentlessly for Title IX, and the present female athletes who are effectively silenced. But anyways, all of that really to say, it would have been really easy for me to ride off into the sunset with the plans that I had made for myself. I've realized by no means did I feel prepared. Still, I don't feel prepared necessarily for what I'm doing, but I realized if he calls us, then he equips us. And he wouldn't bring you through something if he wasn't going to take you all the way through it. Started swimming when I was 4 years old, graduated when I was 22, so this means I spent 18 years of my life dedicated to my sport. You know, of course, your sport-specific training, like your swimming. I met an amazing master swimmer who's in here who has the world record in the 400 IM. Where is she? Somewhere. Oh, she's back there, which is incredible. I think the 400 IM is the hardest event. So anyways, your sport-specific training, your weightlifting, your diet, your sleep schedule, not to mention the physical rehabilitation, the social sacrifices you have to make. You don't get to go to prom with your friends, no sleepovers on Friday nights, because guess what? You have practice at 6 a.m. on Saturday. No vacations, because God forbid we took one day out of the water. High school, middle school, you're practicing before school. You go straight from practice to school, straight from school back to practice, where you swim another 2 hours. Go home, you eat your dinner, do your homework, go to bed, wake up and do it all again the next day. But we were willing to. We knew we had to. My junior year of high school, fortunately for me, I was pretty heavily recruited. Truth be told, I could have gone anywhere in the country that I wanted to swim. But I knew I wanted to stay in the SEC. I'm biased. I think the SEC is the best conference by far. Yeah. My dad played football in the SEC, my mom, she played softball, all my family played in the SEC, and so I knew that's what I wanted. But truth be told, I thought I was going to be a Florida Gator. I took my trip to Florida, ever since middle school, that's what I thought. I took my trip to Florida. I didn't get that feeling. I was told, you'll go to the football game on your official visit and you'll hear the fight song and you'll get chills. But when this fight song was playing, all I could think was, why are people, this is weird. I don't think I want to do that. So I kept taking my trips, but never once was Kentucky on my radar. They were not that good of a swimming school at the time. And so this coach, he kept pestering me, texting, calling me, emailing me nonstop, please take a visit here. Not interested. But my boyfriend at the time, who's not my amazing husband, my boyfriend at the time was a big Kentucky fan. And so, they were offering me, we'll take you to a basketball game. And this was before Kentucky was losing to the Peacocks or whoever in the tournament a few years ago. So I figured, okay, we'll go. If I'm being honest, I was like, we'll just take advantage of this. It'll be like a cool girlfriend thing. I'll get to take him to a basketball game, a cool Christmas gift. But I went there and I fell in love with the university. The team, the campus, Lexington itself, the resources that they poured into us outside of even just athletics. Our academics, our service, that mattered to the university. And those things mattered to me. And that coach, who was a pest, still to this day is my best friend. There couldn't have been a better coach for me. And so on a whim, didn't even tell my parents, which is typical Riley fashion, I committed to the university. It didn't matter to me that they were bottom of the barrel in the SEC. I was willing to overlook that, and I wanted to do what I could to make the university a better swimming school. And so I get there my freshman year, actually the summer before my freshman year, and I thought I had worked hard before, and I was wrong, because this was a different kind of working hard. We were practicing, 6 hours every single day. 3 hours were before 8 a.m., so you practice from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., same story. You go to class, you come back, practice again from 1:30 to 4:30, ate dinner at old people time, 4:45, because we were starving. Did your homework, iced your shoulder, went to bed, did it all again the next day. We swam over 10 miles every day. So my freshman year, I was steadily improving, getting better, but I knew I was capable of more. And so my sophomore year, we come back, and I had finally developed this sense of consistency. I was having good practices every day, consistent among my diet and my sleep and my study habits and within my attitude and my relationships. I really strive to be consistent. And I was having a breakout season. About 3 days before our national championships in 2020, March of 2020, we're gearing up, we're ready to go. This is the meet you work all year for. It's the fastest meet in the world. Comparatively, it's faster and more competitive than the Olympics because we have so much raw talent in the U.S. And so we're gearing up, ready to go about 3 days before. Our coaches pull us out of the water, take us back to the team room, and they say, if you live in the dorm rooms, pack your stuff up tonight. You have to go home. COVID had hit. There was a lot of feelings at this time. Keep in mind, we didn't really know what this meant. But me being told I got to go home mid-March, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. I'm so excited. But that excitement, it lasted all of 24 hours before I realized what this really meant. Because there were no pools open. There were no gyms open. It was hard. But fortunate for me, we've got Old Hickory Lake just over there. And so I put on a wetsuit every single day and swam miles aimlessly in this lake, just really hoping and praying that when we came back eventually in my junior year, I would continue that breakout season. Swimming is one of those sports. Michael Phelps says, every day you take out of the water, it takes you 3 days to get back to where you were. And so if we took months out of the water, my career would essentially be done. So I knew I had to continue training. And the amount of snakes that I swam by and dead catfish that hit you in the face is certainly not pleasant. But again, I knew I had to do those things. Come back my junior year, and I did continue that breakout season. My junior year, outside of the COVID theatrics, which let me just say, being a college athlete during the time of COVID was miserable, to say the least. The manipulation and the bullying, because that's what it was bullying, and coercion and emotional blackmail. I think that's the best way to put it. To try and force us to get the vaccine. I was young. I say was because I feel like I aged a bajillion years in the past year and a half. I still am young, I guess. Healthy. I had already had COVID. I had the antibodies, natural immunity. I thought that was more than any vaccine. But they still told us it was mandatory. You'd be hurting your teammates if you don't get the vaccine. You won't be able to travel with the team if you don't. But I understood that mandatory does not mean law. And so I called BS on our trainers and different people who were trying to force us to get this. And I told them, you can't make me get that. Again, they continued on with, well, you won't be able to travel. But me being my university's best swimmer, okay. I didn't get the vaccine, and of course I traveled. But anyways. And before I go any further, did anyone see the article in the Lexington Herald this week? I wish I had it pulled up. Let me see if I can find it real quick because it's truly hilarious. This article, Todd Kelly, which at the bottom of the article it says he's a gardener. I don't really know what qualifies him to necessarily write the article. It was called "Never Has So Much Been Made of Fifth Place, Riley Gaines and the Politics of Grievance." And this article goes on to basically say I'm doing this to get money and all of this different things. Just so you guys know, you don't get money going on Fox News. That's not how that works. Activism, there's no money in activism, so let's just get that straight. Anyways, I encourage you guys to go read the article. It's quite comical. Anyways, besides the point, outside of the COVID theatrics, and I say all that about the vaccine to show the parallels between the tactics they used to force us to do something then and the tactics they used to keep us quiet in the scenario that we were dealing with my senior year. And I think learning how to say no for myself, my junior year during all of this, it taught me how to say no during my senior year. So outside of the COVID theatrics, my junior year, this is when I won my first individual SEC title. University of Kentucky won our first ever SEC team title in school's history. Yeah. We ultimately this year, my junior year, I ended up placing 7th in the country, which I was proud of. To be top 8, you're an All-American. It's a pretty high honor. I knew I was capable of more. And so it was right then and there that I placed 7th my junior year, that my senior year, I knew I wanted to win a national title, which would, of course, mean becoming the fastest female in the country in my respective event. And I was right on pace to do that. About midway through my senior year, so about November of 2021, I was ranked 3rd in the nation, behind one amazing female swimmer who I knew very well, who was ranked 2nd. I was trailing her by a few tenths, a few 100ths of a second. Because like in most sports, right, your top tier athletes know of each other, regardless of where you compete in the country, because you've grown up competing against each other. So I knew the girl in 2nd very well. But this person leading the nation by body lengths, I'd never heard of before. And this is the first time I became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas. And so there was a lot of red flags at the time. As I mentioned, had never heard of this person, which doesn't happen. This person was a senior from University of Pennsylvania, which isn't a school that historically produces fast swimmers, leading the nation by body lengths and multiple events ranging from the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, and all of the freestyle events in between through the mile, which is long distance. And for those of you who don't necessarily understand swimming, that's like saying your best, if you think of this in terms of your Olympic runners, that's like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. That doesn't happen. They're totally different systems. But again, that's what we were seeing in this person. Lots of head scratching, talking to my coaches, my family, my teammates. Who is this person? We had no idea. Keep in mind, I hadn't seen a picture of this person either, or else it would have been a little more clear. Had no idea until an article came out. And in this article, it very briefly, in a blip of a sentence, it says, Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team. And then the article carried on as if we weren't supposed to just read that. And so my coach, Lars Jorgensen is his name, he sent me the link to the article because he knew my goals. He saw how hard I worked day in and day out. He knew what I'd set out to accomplish. And he said, you need to read this. And so I read it, and I read it again, and I read it a third time. And I was so shocked. Of course I was shocked. But really upon reading it, I felt this sense of relief. And I say that because I went to look up who Will Thomas was, because I was curious. Was this a lateral movement? Was this someone who went from ranking first amongst the men to now continuing to rank first amongst the women? Which is, of course, not what we saw. We saw this was a mediocre male, at best, ranking 462nd in the country the year prior, competing against the men. Which, again, is why I say I felt relieved, because I thought the NCAA would see it how I saw it, and how my teammates saw it, and my family, and my coaches, and how anyone with any amount of brain activity would probably comprehend this. You're clapping too soon, because the NCAA did not see it that way. They saw nothing wrong with it. And so about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, they announced that Leah Thomas's participation with the women was a non-negotiable. There was nothing we could do about it. I got to personally witness and really feel the effect that this infringement had on myself and my teammates and my competitors. And I don't claim to speak for every single girl on that pool deck, but I do claim to speak for the overwhelming majority of us, because I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw from girls who placed 9th and 17th and missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's a 6'4", 22-year-old man fully intact with and exposing male genitalia, inches away from where you were simultaneously undressed. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the grumbles and the whispers of anger and frustration from these girls who, just like myself, had dedicated our entire lives to get there. And I say whispers because that's what they are. That's what they were. We whispered to each other in secrecy. We talked to our coaches, kind of walking on eggshells the entire meet. But that first day of competition was the 500 freestyle, which is not an event that I do. And so I watched on the side of the pool. Again, for those who don't necessarily know how swimming works, you swim prelims in the morning. You qualify top 16, really top 8 to make the championship final. And you come back that evening, you race, and that's where you'll achieve your overall national ranking. And so I'm watching prelims. There was about 8 heats or so. One of the girls in the previous heats, she had just gotten out of the water. Our teams were sat next to each other. She was from Virginia Tech. She comes and stands by me, her coaches, She's watching this final heat where Thomas is swimming, where Thomas is dominating, destroying every girl in the water. And Reka was the girl from Virginia Tech's name. She knew she was going to be right on the cusp of making top 16. And I knew Reka. I didn't know her that well. She was a fifth year. She's from Hungary. Because of COVID, we got an extra year of eligibility, and why anyone would take it, I don't know. But Reka did. And so we're standing there watching this final heat. The heat concludes. Again, Thomas dominates. Reka looks up at the record board and saw she placed 17th. And I will never forget, because this is where my feelings shifted. Because up until this point, I felt, like I mentioned, frustrated. I felt kind of confused as to how this was allowed. Admittedly, I felt kind of intrigued, a little bit of curiosity, but I was ashamed for feeling intrigued, because Reka, she grabbed my hand. Again, I didn't know her that well. And she looks at me with tears running down her face, and she says, "I just got beat by someone who didn't even have to try." And I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It felt like heartbreak. Wasn't this what Title IX was supposed to prevent from happening? We come back that evening. To no one's surprise, Thomas swims to a national title, beating out Olympians, American record holders. I mean, these aren't scrubs. They're the most impressive female swimmers this world has ever seen, again, by body lengths. Even the time Thomas went last year in the country would have beat every girl in the country by body lengths this year. So Thomas was the first male to win a Division I NCAA women's national title, trailblazer. But that second day, we come back, and this is the day that Thomas and I raced in the 200 freestyle. We both swam prelims. We weren't in the same heat, so we qualified top 8. We came back that evening. We dove in the water, raced all 8 laps of freestyle, touched the wall at the end. I look up at the scoreboard, and we had tied, meaning we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, which is pretty rare when you're racing, for a minute and 40 seconds and not even 1/100th separated us. We get out of the water. We go behind the awards podium, where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself. Again, Thomas, who's towering over me at 6'4", me at a mere 5'6". And this official says, "Great job, you two, but you tied. And we only have one trophy, so we're going to give this trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, but you have to go home empty-handed." And I was so taken aback by this. My adrenaline was high, my heart rate was high. I asked the question that no one dared ask all season. Again, we asked it amongst ourselves. In our dorm rooms, we'd secretly talk to our parents about it. But I said, why? Why are you adamant on giving this trophy, to a man in the women's 200 freestyle? I know we tied. I know we don't necessarily account for ties in terms of trophies. But what's your thought process here? And he didn't know what to say. They didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asked the question of why. And so he kind of stumbled on his words, and he's, well, we're just doing this in chronological order, is what he said. To which I said, okay, G comes before T, so what are you being chronological about? And again, he didn't have an answer. This is when his face, it visibly saddened. His eyes sunk in. I could tell he didn't even believe what he was about to tell me. And he looks at me and he says, "Riley, we've been advised when pictures are being taken that Leah has to have the trophy. It's crucial for the optics, and so you can pose with this trophy, but again, you have to give yours back. Leah takes the trophy home, end of story." And that's what pushed me over the edge. All season, we knew what was happening was wrong in regards to the unfair competition and the locker room and the silencing. We knew all of that was wrong. But it wasn't until they reduced everything we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a male at the expense of our own. That's when I was done waiting, because up until this point, truthfully, I'd cowered. I thought surely a coach would say something. I thought surely someone's dad would come down there and yank this man out of our locker room. I thought surely someone with political power, someone within the NCAA, some other swimmer, someone who was supposed to be protecting us, I thought surely would protect us. But I realized that was naive to think, because we weren't seeing that. And I remember the moment distinctly, because I'm standing on this podium, again, sharing this spot with this male who's towering over me, holding this trophy I know I have to give back, which, let me reiterate, I could have cared less about the trophy, the tangible object of the trophy. It's never been about the trophy. That trophy is meaningless to me now. It wasn't about the object. I'm a 12-time All-American. I have lots of those. It was the principle behind what was happening. So again, standing on this podium, holding this trophy I know I have to give back, and it hit me. How in the world could we expect someone else to jump in and save us if we weren't even willing to save ourselves? This has to come from us. We're standing up here right now and we're smiling. We're applauding. We're clapping. But what are we applauding? We were applauding our own erasure, our own demolition. And we knew it was wrong, but still we stood up there. And that's when I knew it had to come from us. And so I know I mentioned the locker room too, but I think it's important, especially for parents, to hear. And if I had to see it, you guys at least have to hear about it. First of all, we weren't forewarned we would be sharing a changing space. There was no prior acknowledgement of this. We had no idea. The only time we became aware would be undressing next to a 6'4". Wikipedia says 6'1". Wikipedia is lying to you. A 6'4" man, 22 years old, again, fully intact with and exposing male parts, was when we were inches away from a 6'4", 22-year-old man, fully intact with and exposing male parts. That was the only time we became aware of this. And I'll kind of set the scene. A swimming locker room, it's not a place of modesty. Those suits that you put on, they're teeny tiny. It takes about 15 minutes, really, at least, to poke and prod and tuck yourself into these suits. I probably shouldn't say tuck. I don't mean the Target kind of tuck. I mean the kind where your nail beds are bleeding by the end of it. You have friends helping you push your skin into this suit. It's a very intimate setting. And I think we can all acknowledge locker rooms aren't comfortable for anyone, even sharing it with your same sex. But growing up a swimmer, you almost become comfortable being vulnerable in this environment. But it's also a place of buzzing and chatter. You get to see your friends from all over the country who otherwise you don't get to see. It's the one meet each year you get to see each other. And so it's very loud. I had my back turned, and all of a sudden that locker room gets dead silent. I'm like, that's weird. And I turn around and I look up, and there's a man with a man's voice. You inherently cover when you hear a man's voice in that space, taking off his women's swimsuit, again, fully intact with and exposing male parts. Of course, it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, it's violating. But I think the best word to describe how we felt was traumatized. And not even just traumatized necessarily because of what we were forced to see and how we were forcibly exploited. It was traumatizing to me to know just how easy it was for those people who created these guidelines, these policies, those authority figures, how easy it was for them to totally dismiss our rights to privacy without even a second thought, without even bare minimum forewarning us of this arrangement. And so I immediately left the locker room. And I went up to one of the officials on the pool deck and I said, what are the guidelines that allowed this to happen? I understand the guidelines for the meet, which was a mere 12 months of HRT, hormone replacement therapy. There's no amount of hormone replacement therapy that mitigates male advantage, but I can tell you 12 months is nothing. So I said, I know the guidelines for the competition, but what are the guidelines that allowed a man into our locker room? So nonchalantly, he responds back with, oh, well, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex. The first thing that I said to him was, okay, you realize by acknowledging how you had to change the rules, you're admitting that Thomas isn't a woman, right? Or else you wouldn't have had to change the rules, so I guess thank you for just admitting that. But secondly, unisex. So any man, any coach, any official, any parent, to be totally frank, any pervert who wanted to be in that space had full access, and again, bare minimum, we weren't even forewarned. So that's what the locker room looked like. But one more piece about this meet, which I find to be interesting, and naturally the media has done a terrible job of covering. At this same meet where we had Leah Thomas, who of course is a male identifying as a woman, we had to go to training to learn how to use pronouns, we were told we had to refer to this person using she, her pronouns. At this same meet, we had another athlete who was transitioning. But this athlete was transitioning from a female identifying as a man. In this same training, we were told we had to use he, him pronouns when referring to this individual. This Izzy was her name, now identifies as Isaac. All right, you can hear me? Does this one work? Swam at Yale, which, might I add, let's just use this. I'm going to take this off, sorry. Which, might I add, what's up with the Ivy Leagues? I thought this was supposed to be places of higher education, but that is certainly not proving to be true. Sorry if any of you got your degrees from an Ivy League. But you're getting lectured from a blonde from University of Kentucky, so there's a joke in there somewhere. But anyways, this swimmer swam at Yale. Formerly Izzy, now goes by the name of Isaac, swam only in a Speedo as a female, nothing covering her top. But I say this to say, if we were really basing this off gender identity, like the NCAA claimed, like the Biden administration claims, then why did we have someone identifying as a man competing with the women? And I can answer this question. Any common sense American can answer this question. And it's because Izzy, now Isaac, would have and will never be able to compete at that same level against the men. She ended up in the 100 freestyle, which let me just give you guys a visual. I know this sounds like a South Park episode or like a Babylon Bee headline, but keep in mind this is what we were seeing. Finals of the 100 freestyle, top 8 swimmers in the country. You have a 6'4" man in a women's swimsuit with a bulge next to a woman wearing only a Speedo. I'm watching this and I'm like, no, this is the Twilight Zone. Like, am I missing something? Am I the one who's crazy? But Izzy, now Isaac, ended up finishing 5th in the country in the 100 freestyle, which is a huge achievement, to be top 5. It's an incredible honor, All-American, a very great female swimmer. Now she is competing with the men. Finishes dead last every single time. The one meet I watched of hers this year, the only male swimmer she beat was a male swimmer with one arm. Again, I don't say it to be funny. I say it to perfectly highlight the concerns that so many of us have and to show really who's at jeopardy here, because it's not the men's category. But all of this happened. I think we can all agree that swimming is not a sport that garners media attention. But this meet was unique because there was a lot of media attention. Lots of reporters, left-leaning, right-leaning, everything in between, on the ground at the meet, desperately hoping someone would give them a quote they could take back to their publishers, hoping someone would bite the hook. My inbox was filled with reporters reaching out. They'd find your name on the heat sheet, they'd find your social media,
They even found my parents' emails somehow, but all my teammates were the same. Our inboxes were full. No one was willing to say anything. We'd been advised in the media training we had to do at University of Kentucky, where we learned as a senior 21-year-old in college how to use she, her pronouns. At this same training at UK we had to go through, they advised us, first and foremost, they said, don't speak to the media, you'll regret it. It'll follow you for the rest of your life. If you get any requests, just send them over our way, and we'll help you, is what they said. They continued to say, remember who you represent. Remember, you signed a scholarship. You're not really speaking in your own personal capacity when you're wearing UK on your chest or on your cap. So just remember that. And so at first, I started to send all of these requests to our media person, like we'd been advised. I thought maybe she would help us coordinate a time to talk or something. But our media lady at UK responded back and said, oh, thank you, I declined all of these for you. And I was like, hold on. I didn't ask you to decline them. We were advised to send them to you, but I don't want to decline them. I do want to talk to this reporter. Again, it just continued on with the threats of, well, remember who you're speaking for, because it's not for yourself. I very quickly cut her out, and I went straight to the reporter. I had the lady I chose to give an interview to worked at the Daily Wire. I told her about the trophy. I told her about the locker room, the silencing, the different things. In this story, it blew up. I think for a couple reasons, one of which being sports is something that resonates with everyone. It's not boring like the economy or the environment. Everyone loves sports. And secondly, I think people saw the severity of what we were dealing with. I think when you hear the term trans woman, you think of someone who is fully committed to transitioning, has gone through the surgeries, has computable testosterone levels. But no, what we competed against was a man who had grown out his hair. And I think people began to see that. This Daily Wire interview very quickly turned into Fox and CPAC and being pulled on stage with President Trump and all kinds of things. My thought process during this time, the few months before I had graduated and was going to dental school, I figured, I don't have a job right now. I'll just say yes to every interview. It could be a podcast with one listener. I didn't care. Anyone who wanted to talk, I was willing to share what our experience was. I pretty quickly began to feel like I was preaching to the choir, because every old man who watches Fox already agrees with me. We're missing the debate right now too, you guys, so I'm proud of y'all for being here. Every old man who watches Fox already agrees with me, but how could I reach the people who don't agree with me? That was important to me. I started in my own personal capacity, reaching out to left-leaning sites, CNN, MSDNC, even Kentucky Sports Radio, which I thought was really interesting. Matt Jones, right? I found it so odd he wasn't covering this topic. It had gained national attention, but Kentucky Sports Radio wasn't touching on it. And my husband was there for this conversation. I reached out to Matt over Twitter, and I said, hey, I'm just curious as to why you're not covering it. I would love for you to, because I know how many viewers and listeners in Kentucky love you, and I'm really just trying to get the story out. So would you be willing to have a conversation? We talked to each other on the phone, and he told me he wasn't willing to cover this topic because he didn't agree with me. Actually, first what he said was, I don't like to get political. I was like, don't you have a book called Ditch Mitch? He was like, well, yeah, but, and then he further went on to say, I just really don't agree with you. We kind of got on into this argument about it that lasted, it must have been an hour. And finally, towards the end of our conversation, he says, well, what's your solution? What does a perfect solution look like to you? And I said, I don't know. I'm a 21-year-old girl. I don't think I should be entrusted to make solutions, but I know the solution doesn't compromise or doesn't involve women compromising anything. He said, there's your problem. You're not willing to compromise, therefore you're a hateful bigot. This was so hard for me to hear, and I immediately wanted to tell him, okay, and this is why Clay Travis is better than you. But that was the general consensus. Every single platform, left-leaning platform I had reached out to, responded back with, we don't want to give you a platform to spread your hate. So I kind of continued on, saying yes to whatever I could. But with my father, who had played football, professional football in the NFL for years, he always told me growing up, it's either put up or shut up. You can complain all you want, but unless you're willing to do something about it, then it's merely just complaining. And no one likes to be around a complainer. And I began to feel like that. I began to feel like I was complaining. How could I make impact? That's what I wanted to do, make change so no girl had to go through what we went through. And that's when I started totally out of my own pocket, traveling state to state, testifying on behalf of these women's sports bills. The first state, of course, was Kentucky. Oh my gosh. I went back and read my first little press conference statement I read alongside Senator Robbie Mills, who's just so amazing. He's great. Is he here? Oh, there he is. I went back and read what I had wrote and read aloud. I have grown so much in terms of confidence. I was still so scared to say what I really thought, to say what we all thought. I was still pandering to the pronoun nonsense and different things. I went back and read it, and it was so apologetic. It was as if I was apologizing for feeling how I felt. So I couldn't be more grateful for you guys. You really propagated me into feeling determined and secure enough to stand up for girls across the country in these different states. So I really appreciate you. Speaking of Kentucky, they got it passed in the House and the Senate. Governor Andy Beshear vetoed the bill, meaning he saw no problem with males competing in women's sports, men changing in our locker rooms. Fortunately, they were able to override that veto. But the governor, the message he sent to me and to my teammates at University of Kentucky, to every girl across the state, to every girl in the nation, was that we don't matter. Was that our feelings, our privacy, our equal opportunity, our feelings, our dignity, none of that mattered to him. What mattered to Governor Andy Beshear was protecting the feelings and the identity of men, boys, even if it meant we became collateral damage in the process, which unfortunately we did, and that continues to happen. But they got it through. So again, that's really great news. 23 states have thus far, most recently North Carolina, which is great, considering 3 years ago only Idaho had. So lots of momentum, lots of traction, still a lot of work to be done. Also at the state level, I have introduced a bill called the Women's Bill of Rights. Have been working on this piece of legislation, which, crazily enough, this is just a law that defines the word woman. I can't believe we need that, but it's proven to be necessary, and so we've gotten that passed first in Kansas with bipartisan support, then in my home state of Tennessee, and then in Oklahoma. Governor Stitt signed an executive order, most recently in Nebraska, where Governor Pillen signed an executive order. And what was so unique about Governor Pillen was I met with him on August 27th, and I pretty much just directly asked, will you sign an executive order on the Women's Bill of Rights? He kind of laughed, like, sure. I thought he was just trying to get me away. But he called me 3 days later on August 30th. And he said, I've signed an executive order on the Women's Bill of Rights. And I said, why? That was quick. Normally it doesn't happen that quick. He said, well, here in Nebraska, on that same day, they had their Nebraska women's volleyball game, where they broke the world record for attendance at a women's sporting event. There were 92,003 people who were there to watch these women play. And he told me he wanted to send a message to these girls. And the message that he wanted to send was the exact opposite message we got from Andy Beshear. Because the message he sent to those girls was that they do matter. was that their privacy, again, their safety, their equal opportunities, that mattered to him. And I think that just displayed leadership, which is great news. There's a lot of levels, layers to this onion, really. The state level, the federal level, where we have Title IX, a beautiful 37-word, it's only 37 words, federal civil rights law, preventing discrimination on the basis of sex. We have an administration in the White House right now who's actively rewriting Title IX. So it's no longer preventing discrimination on the basis of sex, it would be preventing discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And so what this means in a nutshell, because it's a lot broader than just sports. Men can live in dorm rooms with women. Men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces on campuses. Men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Men can join sororities, which is already happening. Under this new rewrite, it's sexual harassment. I would be guilty and charged with sexual harassment for misgendering Leah Thomas and using he, him pronouns when referring to Leah Thomas. I'd be charged with sexual harassment. A young 17, 18-year-old girl who gets randomly housed with a male identifying as a woman, if she were to go to administration and complain about being housed with this male, guilty and charged with sexual harassment. Not the man who's parading around our locker rooms. No, that's brave. That's stunning and inspiring. But me calling a spade is sexual harassment. So doing lots of work at the federal level to combat this. Greg Steube passed the Protection for Women and Girls in Sports Act on the House side. It fell entirely on party lines, meaning that all 219 Republicans voted in favor of this piece of legislation, and all 203, every single last one of them, all 203 Democrats voted in opposition of protecting women and girls. And these are mothers. These are fathers. They have young daughters of their own. And you're telling me you would really be okay with your young daughter undressing next to, again, a grown man? I have this hope in my heart. I hold on to that hope that they don't actually believe that. Because if they do, I think there's a separate conversation that needs to be had involving CPS, because that's disgusting, it's perverse, and you're a sellout for your own child. It hasn't gotten through on the Senate side yet, but it's crucial we get a new administration in the White House. This country can't afford 4 more years of Democratic leadership. But there's also within the specific sport governing bodies. I'll tell you right now what the NCAA and the IOC are doing, which the IOC is the International Olympic Committee. The IOC's guidelines, which is what the NCAA has followed now, they say there is no presumptive advantage between the sexes. Men possess no athletic advantage over women. Actually, let me read it to you because I have it right here. It's so ironic. One second. Let's see. It says, under bylaw 5.1, no athlete should be precluded from competing or excluded from competition on the exclusive ground of an unverified, alleged, or perceived unfair competitive advantage due to their sex variations, physical appearance, and/or transgender status. And until evidence determines otherwise, athletes should not be deemed to have an unfair or disproportionate competitive advantage due to their sex variations, physical appearance, and/or transgender status. This is the Olympics. They say there's no difference between man and woman. The NCAA has followed suit. But what these large governing bodies are doing is they want no hands on deck. They're pulling out entirely. They used to have blanket bans, but now they just list this framework, and they leave it up to each specific sport to make their own guidelines. So for example, swimming, the international governing body is FINA, which FINA has taken a bold first step in prioritizing fairness in sports. And they've now said if you've gone through male puberty, you can't compete in the women's category. FINA has done that. World Athletics, which is track and field. Cycling, IPF, which is the International Powerlifting Federation, most recently the World Chess Association, which I think is kind of funny because you have sports like soccer who won't, but chess has stood up for women. All these sports and some others have taken a bold first step, but these policies aren't perfect because they say you can't, if you've gone through male puberty, you can't compete with women, but if you've transitioned before the age of 12, then you can. And I think even having that in there is criminal, to say the least. No one should be able to consent to puberty blockers or hormones or surgical procedures at the age of 12. I still can't even rent a car, so I certainly don't think that is acceptable by any means. But it's a bold first step in prioritizing fairness. And so again, there's a lot of levels to this, which we're appreciating the little steps along the way. I want to briefly touch on the silencing aspect, though. My university, our university, University of Kentucky, after all this happened, before I took a public stance, I called Mitch Barnhart. He had been a great friend of mine all 4 years. He's an amazing man. I called him and I said, look, Mitch, this is what happened. This is how we feel. And when I say we, I mean my entire team at University of Kentucky. Being team captain, I made sure to facilitate these conversations, and of our team of 40 girls, 38 of them felt the exact same way that I'm sharing with you guys. And so I said, this is what happened, this is how we feel. How do you feel if I take a public stance in acknowledging how this is wrong and harmful? And I will never forget what Mitch said back. He said to me, Riley, I love you. I support you. Speak your heart, stay true to your convictions, and don't worry about painting the university in a bad light. We're behind you. Yeah. At the time when he said that, I thought nothing of it because I thought that's how any athletic director would talk to their student athlete. But I pretty quickly realized that was very wrong. Based off other conversations I had with other swimmers, Leah Thomas's teammates, they were forced to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings each week to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. They were told, you can't take a stance because your school has already taken your stance for you. You will never get a job. You will never get into grad school. You'll lose your friends. You'll lose your scholarship and your playing time. 16 of these girls signed on to an email to their administration and their parents expressing their discomfort in the locker room. And I have a screenshot of the response. The administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here's some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourself. They told these girls if they weren't okay with seeing male parts, then they were the ones who had the problem. They further went on to tell these girls, if you do speak out, and any harm whatsoever were to come towards Leah's way, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, through social media, whatever that harm looked like, then they were solely responsible. And they would be responsible for a potential death, making them murderers. They told these girls they would be murderers if they advocated for fair play and privacy in their locker rooms. And believe it or not, it's effective in keeping us quiet. But it's not just the athletes who are silenced. It's the coaches. It's the parents who work corporate jobs who are terrified to defend their daughters because they don't want to lose their jobs. The coaches in particular, the athletic directors, which, not Mitch, I want to reiterate how amazing he is. I found out he called every single SEC university and told them to get behind me, which, again, there's no other athletic director doing that. But they had this big NCAA convention, where they were announcing their NCAA Woman of the Year. And I was University of Kentucky's nominee. Each school got one nomination, and they chose me, which was really special because at UK we have Abby Steiner, who's breaking world records in track and field. We have Ryan Howard, who's the #1 WNBA draft pick. We have the national championship volleyball team, national championship rifle team. But again, they chose me, and so I was really humbled by this because this award, it encompasses more than just your athletic achievement. Athletically, I had done some great things. I still hold the SEC record in the 200 butterfly. had done some really awesome things, but I took great pride in my academics, where I was also the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year my senior year, but also your community service, which really mattered to me. Even still, I'm the Tennessee Special Olympics swim coach. Was very involved in Special Olympics Kentucky, this program, mentoring program called Amachi, which is incredible. It works with children who have one or both of their parents incarcerated. I was matched with this girl named Cammie, and she was my mentee for 4 years. She went to Henry Clay. She is just amazing. It really makes you understand how fortunate we are when you get to see something like that. But anyways, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. And so to receive this nomination for NCAA Woman of the Year, I was very honored. Until a full list of nominees for NCAA Woman of the Year came out. And it was not exclusive to just women, because Leah Thomas was University of Pennsylvania's nominee. Immediately, the award, again, was devalued, meaningless to me. But the NCAA was having a big conference where they were going to announce their Woman of the Year, and so I figured I'll go. Of course, I won't go in support. I went and handed the NCAA hand-to-hand a legal demand letter saying that if they don't stop discriminating on the basis of sex, there will be legal action taken. But they also had this huge convention hall where companies and organizations could buy a booth inside, sell things, pass out things. So I thought, what better way to get myself in front of these people than to buy a booth and put myself in front of these people. So I applied to buy a booth with my name, Riley Gaines. Keep in mind, I had been outspoken at this point. Denied. Applied again. I'm trying to give you $2,000. Denied. Came up with an alias, and they were like, of course we'll take your money. So I got in there. And I had passed out little bracelets and pamphlets talking about Title IX, and to every single athletic director who walked by, I shared what we went through. And every single athletic director said, thank you for doing what you're doing. Keep going, keep fighting, keep pushing. In the first 60 or so, I was pretty honored. But then as it continued, I began to feel frustrated. If we're all on the same page, what's the discrepancy? And I began asking, that's great that you say you support this, but would you be willing to put your name to it? Oh, no. You see, really can't have a lawsuit. Can't risk losing my job. I'm the breadwinner, sorry. And then they would very quickly turn and alleviate themselves from the conversation entirely. Even the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, who has now stepped down, but publicly, in the days following the Leah Thomas NCAA championships, publicly he released a statement. And I remember it because it's so comical. He says, I unequivocally stand in my decision to allow Leah Thomas to swim with the women because it's based in evolving science. I didn't know science evolved. Privately, I see him at this convention, and I make eye contact with him, and I'm like, there's no way he's escaping me. And so I go up to him. Of course, I share what we went through, and he says, keep going. Keep fighting, keep pushing. But the audacity for him to tell me to keep fighting as if he's not the one we're fighting against. All of that to say, these people are spineless. They're cowards. They don't have a backbone. They know this is wrong. But they're peer pressured. A year and a half later, I've been able to step back, remove myself from the situation, and I really asked myself the question of why. Why are we so adamant on teaching young children this, taking away parental rights, putting men in women's locker rooms? Why? What? Doesn't make sense. But myself as a Christian, I see it entirely as spiritual warfare. Paul warns us that these spiritual battles will intensify, and we will live in a time where bitter is sweet and dark is light and evil is moral. And we're living in that. Fortunately and beautifully, We know who wins. The Bible tells us who wins. It tells us how this ends. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell us how long we have to endure it, but it tells us who wins. But why? Really, if you ask yourselves why, taking into account the breakdown of faith, look at things like the breakdown of our family, of denying objective truth, silencing the emotional blackmail, the changing of the language that we use. Have you noticed we're referring to ourselves as biological women? Stop that. Stop calling yourselves biological anything. I adhered to that for a long time because I thought I had to make the distinction. No, the only distinction you have to make is I am a woman, this person is a man, or a male, or a father, or a boy, not a woman, female, girl, or mother. We don't have to put that prefix biological, because when we do, we're admitting, even subconsciously, that there's an unbiological alternative. There's so much power in language and how we use it and the emphasis we put on words, because it influences our behaviors and our beliefs. And so we have to stop with all of that. Even Mr. Rachel Levine, a Biden appointee, our Assistant Secretary of Health, who also happens to be obese, which, as a Secretary of Health for the United States, I would figure you wouldn't want someone who's obese, but whatever works, I guess. He's now referring to women as egg producers, cervix havers, uterus owners, menstruators, bleeders, chest feeders, people with birthing capacities. Now they're referring to female anatomy as a bonus hole. I mean, it's crazy. So the changing of the language, let's lay it out again. The changing of the language, breakdown of faith, the breakdown of families, the breakdown of our freedoms, such as freedom of speech, such as taking of the guns. Did we see what happened in New Mexico? I don't think that'll work out that well for her. I know that probably wouldn't work that well here. I'm going to guess there's a lot of guns in this room. Just a guess. I saw some thumbs up, yeah. The denying of truth, the silencing, the propaganda, media bias, different things. Textbook Marxism. Textbook. And you open any history book and see how that turns out for any civilization. And it's not pretty. Look at Venezuela, or Cuba, or China, or North Korea, or Russia, or Germany, and see how that turned out for them. Have that conversation with someone who fled that country and is living here, and see what they tell you, because it's a slippery slope. And the leaders of this country are actively taking us down that slope. Actually, I don't even think it's a slope. I think it's a cliff with sharp, jagged rocks at the bottom. And I think we're being pushed off the cliff. It's important, parents, be willing to defend your daughters. They need you. They need you to be willing to defend them. I was an adult at that NCAA championships. I was 21. I was still looking for the people who were supposed to be protecting us. That being said, this conversation very quickly gets centered around girls and women, and we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, which is a very valid question. Don't even get me started on Megan Rapinoe. But I think just as often as we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, we should be asking ourselves the question of where are the men. We need strong men. There's this saying, and it's hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And it's incredibly interesting because you can see this process play over and over and over again throughout history in any civilization. I think the last time we had a society full of strong men was in the 1940s during World War II, the self-proclaimed greatest generation, which I totally agree. We had men lying about their age to enlist in the draft and fight in the war. And now we have men lying about their sex to get into women's sports and women's spaces. If that doesn't tell you which part of the process we're in now, which is certainly where weak men have created hard times. We can only hope these hard times garner strong men, but we need to expedite this process. And so parents, teach your sons masculinity. Of course, teach them to respect and honor and uphold women and womanhood, but teach them how to be strong men. We need strong men. I bet there's no woman in this room who doesn't want a strong man. I appreciate you guys being here, really ready to roll up your sleeves and say enough is enough. It's important to take Kentucky back. It's certainly needed. I appreciate Commonwealth Policy Center, the work that they do, how they're willing and how they are fighting for Kentucky families. I just talked with Representative Andy Barr today, and I told him I was going to be here, and he wanted me to wish his best. He's amazing in the work that he does as well, and so just couldn't be more grateful for you guys. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you so much.